Hi, critical thinkers. Thank you for joining us on this chilly December evening. I'm your host, Brad Hartley, and it is Sunday, December 7th, 2014, and this is Critical Mass TV. Our goal on this show, as I have always said, is not to simply identify another shocking issue in the seemingly endless litany of human malfeasance. It is to strongly link these clearly systemic realities to the domination and control made necessary protecting the ruling billionaire elites of the United States and the second-tier rest of the world. But just as important, with each show, we try to emphasize that these problems are fixable. They are not insurmountable, and that we survive as an incredible species in spite of overclass greed and the dominance of their gigantic corporations, not because of it. We hear endlessly from the corporate media spokesmodels that the system is broken. And it may seem that way if you exist on the expendable side of the greed cult. But understand this, the system is working just as it was designed. The main difference today, as opposed to a pre-Occupy Wall Street world, more and more people are paying attention. In this context, we will continually show that the American myth is examined. The level playing field of equal opportunity, the economic mobility of hard work, and importantly, justice for all. It is packed in ruling class baggage and a set of unquestioned values reflecting the power, property, and privilege of some very rich white men. So business as usual has got to change, and meaningfully rich democracy seems the best mechanism for lasting justice. As it now stands, people in the streets from Ferguson and New York, from British Columbia to Burlington, are the greatest incubators of that democracy. They are resisting in-your-face injustice. From the police, whose role it is to protect the rich from the rest of us, to the fossil fuel industry, who seems intent on cooking the planet for some short-term profit, partying. The necessity for a just transition is becoming ever more apparent. I like to keep the People's Climate March tagline ever present. It's time to change everything. Tonight, I'd like to continue this necessary conversation by introducing my guests, all the way from the great state of New York. I have Mary Alice Shemo of Plattsburgh, New York, and Mary Alice is a grandmother and activist. Darlene Waldron, who is also a grandmother and activist. Adrian Arrivillaga, student activist, and Dan Helmer, organizer, Dan is also a student. So thank you all you guys for joining me tonight. I appreciate you making the trip over here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start off tonight. We really, a lot of the focus of these activists has been the phenomenon now of hauling crude oil by rail, to basically from the oil fields where it's produced to eventually to the refineries. So just generally, how did you guys become aware of this, boom in oil by rail? What do you think, Mary Alice?
We kept hearing the trains going by.
All right.
We live in Plattsburgh, and there were just more and more of them, and they were longer and longer, and then we started talking to other people and reading things, and then even though the news doesn't tell you everything you need to know, some things get through. And so we did hear about some of the derailments and things that have taken place, and Loch Megantic, I think, even though it wasn't the kind of thing the rulers really want us to know about, it also fit the if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it did get some attention.
So Lac Mégantic was the accident last year in Quebec where a train loaded with Bakken Crude from North Dakota derailed and exploded in Lac Mégantic, Quebec, and didn't it kill, I think, 47
people. 47 right off.
And I noticed that the media has now, after a year has gone by, it's if it's even mentioned at all, it's much more about equipment failure and staffing, and the issue really doesn't seem to be to corporate media, the hauling of all that, crude oil. The focus is more on the train itself and the operator and but of course, as we know, that crude oil being hauled on the nation's railways, all of those trains have to be going through people's towns and communities, and it's a phenomenal amount of it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And it keeps getting more. It feels as if the people that are pumping the Bakken Crude want to see how fast they can get every last drop.
Yeah, well, that's going to be the nature of that industry. That would be their business model. Get it out and get it burned quickly,
Yep.
Money.
The nature of
That's what
that.
it's about.
Yeah, but if we had started 40 years ago when some of the information about climate change, in fact, it was known that CO2 will hold heat.
As a
150
greenhouse gas.
Yeah, as a greenhouse. It didn't start being called a greenhouse gas right away, but that it would hold in heat was known 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we've known so much for so long, and yet the current system of doing business and the maximization of profit has kind of held us back from making some of the changes we need to make and could have made with less pain.
Right.
And less abruptly if we had started.
Moving away from
Yeah.
fossil fuels. I know I've been reading a 1981 National Geographic that was a special energy issue. There was another oil crisis, if you remember, those of us that are old
Way
enough,
back.
in 1981, 82, when Reagan got into office. The gas prices really spiked, and there was more discussion about energy and synthetic fuels, but it's amazing the facts that they have about global warming and fracking and Bakken Crude, and none of this is really new under the sun.
No.
But the other fact is coming from North Dakota, there's no real big pipeline infrastructure coming out of there.
No.
So it has to, in their minds, it has to be hauled by rail if we're going to do it now.
But you don't want to build more infrastructure because infrastructure creates its own. If it's there, it has to be used.
Right. You're enabling.
Yeah, enabling. That's
Which we all kind of,
good.
as consumers, we are kind of enabling a bit as far as our seeming unwillingness to slow down as consumers so far. There's definitely some movement in the right direction, but there's 750 million gallons of regular unleaded gasoline sold in the U.S. every day, which is a lot.
That's a number to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
And you pop an extra $1 on that like they did after Katrina, or
Yeah.
$2 per gallon. If you notice, that never went away,
Nope.
that price spike. So they've basically just kept all that,
That's crazy.
which is another $750 million a day for the industry, the retail industry. So one thing, I was checking out a couple of facts just about how much oil is going down the rails. Gosh, if I can find that, there was I think there's about 45,000 ethanol tankers alone that are all in these DOT 111 tankers that we're going to talk about a little bit. And then let's see, they were transporting, and with ethanol figures, these are 14 billion gallons per year of just ethanol on top of the spike in crude oil, because crude oil wasn't, wasn't being hauled in these tankers until they started hydrofracking in North Dakota for the, to loosen up this crude oil. But let's see, and there's about, there was let's see, 92,000, let's see, cars moving flammable liquids in the U.S. in the last quarter, the most recent quarter, and that's up 44%, and almost all of that is driven by crude oil.
Scary.
So that's a lot of cars.
Yeah.
And these are the DO2 that were ruled unsafe in like 1992.
Yeah, wasn't it 20 years ago or
Yeah.
20 plus years ago? So
So
they're
it's
called
not-
DOT 111s in the
111,
United
yeah.
States. In Canada, they're still 111s, but it's the Canadian designation up there.
Yeah, I wasn't even born at that point.
Those cars, from looking, they're definitely designed to haul hazardous liquids, but they were not designed to haul flammable liquids, believe it or not.
Yes,
No.
that's
Now,
the
Not
my
at all.
understanding of those cars is that they were originally built to haul things like molasses.
Okay. Which is not a
we
hazmat.
hope is not.
Yeah.
No, I like those cookies. I hope it's not hazardous. But I believe that. And, so some of the problems with them are very thin tank walls. The ends of the cars are designed for zero impact. And then, of course, the valving on them is not designed to be resistant to them in a derailment. If it was molasses, it would be a lot less catastrophic than when it's full of Bakken crude oil, which, as we're going to see in a video that we're going to put on here shortly, it's going to show us some of the nature of Bakken crude, which I was really blown away watching
Literally?
this. You literally,
Yeah.
no pun intended.
Yes.
So if Jim could play that video for me, I would appreciate that. And it'll bring up some good points, and we will come back and discuss some more. And while we're waiting for
One of my
him to get
captains
that,
summed it up the best. He said this was like driving into hell, and it was.
Fire Chief Tim Pellerin and a group of volunteer firefighters drove from Maine to help put out the Lac-Mégantic inferno. The fire caused when a mile-long train carrying North Dakota crude derailed and exploded, killed 47 people. Pellerin was haunted by the devastation he had witnessed, haunted by the fear that something similar could happen in the U.S.
We're shipping millions and millions of gallons daily over the tracks, and people are sound asleep in their homes. These trains are rolling through at night. Nobody even realizes what's right next door to them, what could happen.
The crude that devastated Lac-Mégantic came from here, the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota, ground zero of the nation's domestic oil boom. A lack of pipeline infrastructure has spurred the railroads to create pipelines on wheels. So-called oil unit trains with over 100 tankers that can haul up to 3 million gallons of crude at a time. With so much oil moving over the nation's railways, the United States has already had some close calls.
We didn't know that it was Bakken crude at the time, but we knew that it was some type of crude oil.
Steve Ferguson is the fire chief in Lynchburg, Virginia.
All you could see was this huge ball of flame, and there were cars laying everywhere.
In April, a train carrying 105 tankers of North Dakota crude derailed in the middle of a workday when a rail bed gave away in downtown Lynchburg. Do you feel like your city dodged a bullet that day?
Well, maybe we dodged a bomb. We got hit by the bullet. I think we were very fortunate. Could have fallen the other way, and it's heavily populated restaurant right there. Yeah, we would have had a whole different issue on it.
The near disaster in Lynchburg follows similar incidents in Alabama and North Dakota. Like Lac-Mégantic, those derailments and the fires that followed involved Bakken crude.
We have accumulated data from Castleton, North Dakota, from Ellisville, Alabama, Lac-Mégantic, and now Lynchburg.
Scott Smith, chief scientist at the environmental organization Water Defense, is one of those attempting to solve the mystery of why Bakken crude appears to be at the root of so many rail disasters.
Fresh Bakken crude, North Dakota.
Smith traveled to North Dakota and took samples of the crude.
Fresh out of the ground.
What he found was surprising. Tell me a little bit about the properties of this oil that make it different from other crudes.
What makes Bakken different is the clear, colorless volatiles. When you shake them up,
Right.
it creates pressure.
Right.
And when that pressure is subject to a spark, a derailment, you get that explosion.
You get explosions like this one near Castleton, North Dakota, when an oil unit train clipped a derailed freight car. The oil industry has repeatedly insisted Bakken is no different from similar types of crude, but other independent studies support Smith's finding. The industry in North Dakota has said that the Bakken crude is what it calls within norms, that it's no more, it alleges, volatile or flammable than any other crude oil. What do you think of that?
That's just not the case from the analysis that we've done.
Reporter Rob Davis of the Oregonian commissioned an analysis after seeing a 250% increase in oil train traffic in Oregon just this past year.
The analysis that we did of oil that's moving through the state shows that it is far more volatile than gasoline that you put in your car, than any oil that moves through the country's pipeline system.
What was different?
A lot of propane, a lot of butane, a lot of methane and ethane. They're natural gas, basically.
In fact, Davis found that Bakken crude had 6 times more propane than comparable crude, making it more flammable and causing more pressure to build up during transport. And the Transportation Safety Board of Canada's analysis of the Bakken crude at Lac Mégantic said the crude oil had a volatility comparable to that of a gasoline product. The explosiveness of North Dakota crude has sparked even greater concern across the river in Vancouver, Washington, where more than 2 oil unit trains pass through the city every day, and more could be on the way. Matt Landon belongs to a network of oil train spotters who use Twitter to bring attention to the dangers of the oil unit trains. What do you want people to know about these trains?
I want people to know when these trains are coming through our communities so they can be prepared. It's part of a risk assessment that the community needs to be able to be involved in.
The movement of millions of gallons of crude to the Columbia River Gorge on the way to West Coast refineries has also raised the specter of an environmental catastrophe.
An oil train derailment in the Columbia River Gorge would be devastating to the local economy, to the environment, and to all the people that live along the river and depend on it for their livelihood.
But it's the higher volume route to East Coast refineries through densely populated cities like Chicago that poses an even greater threat. BNSF, just one transporter of Bakken crude, brings 27 oil unit trains through Chicago's Cook County every week. When you saw the pictures from Lac Mégantic, what went through your mind?
There, but for the grace of God, it could have been in this town.
Karen Darch is the mayor. She visited Lac Mégantic after the disaster. What worries Darch most is the known vulnerability of the tankers, non-pressurized, thin-skinned DOT-111s that are being used to transport the crude. How would you characterize the DOT-111?
I referred to it once as the Ford Pinto of rail cars, and I use that analogy because when it was involved in an accident, there were many times that it just burst into flame and exploded and people died needlessly.
Yet because of huge profits for oil companies and railways, tens of thousands of these older and weaker cars, never designed to carry flammable material, are being pressed into service to carry the bulk of Bakken crude.
To use Ralph Nader's terminology, the DOT-111 tank car is unsafe at any speed.
Jim Hall is former chairman of the NTSB.
The American people have not been adequately protected since the 1970s, when the NTSB issued its first study indicating problems with the DOT-111.
And again in 1991, when the NTSB found that at least half DOT-111s will leak when they derail. The Canadian Transportation Safety Board has finally decided that it will no longer permit DOT-111s to transport crude.
Hooray for the Canadians.
Why has the United States not followed suit?
Economics, it's the railroad industry, the tank car industry, don't want to go through the replacement of tank cars. The fix is a stronger tank car with a full head shield, thicker exterior skin, and more protection.
Representatives of the railway, railcar, and oil industries declined to be interviewed. Under pressure, the railways did agree in February to reduce oil unit train speeds in large cities. And the railcar industry says once the federal government finally issues new regulations, it will build stronger tankers.
Good morning.
In May, U.S. Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox recommended, but did not mandate, that oil companies avoid using the DOT 111 to move Bakken crude.
It's politics as usual at the Department of Transportation. Study, delay, don't act.
The DOT declined multiple requests for an interview. In a written statement, a spokesman says Secretary Fox has intently focused on improving the safe transportation of crude by rail since he took office.
Does it take a tragedy? Unfortunately, yes. Canada had its.
So that video is really eye-opening, and I hope it has opened some eyes of some of the viewers. They gave a pretty good description of the Bakken crude itself and kind of where it's coming from. And I mentioned before that there's basically no pipelines coming out of that area in North Dakota. I think, at least I'm going to speak for myself when I say that stronger rail cars are not the only answer to these kind of issues. Reducing demand dramatically for fossil fuels is the actual answer that's going to help save us in the long term. Yeah. But in the short term, like Adrian brought up, these cars were found to be, the NTSB's own language is wholly inadequate when that was investigating derailments and ruptures and fires. Just the ethanol fires alone, 20 years ago were killing people in their cars, and there's some pretty dramatic stories out there when I was looking around, and it's only continuing now with the oil being hauled in those things. I think that reducing our demand, it would also help us in some of these incredible industrial scale perpetual wars in the Middle East, which are about oil. And, there's the enrichment of the wrong industries, to heights of an ExxonMobil now is literally one of the most powerful institutions on earth, becoming more powerful than a lot of governments based on all this oil wealth, and we're heading in the wrong direction in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But in the short term, they're hauling that stuff down through our communities in these cars that are designed again for molasses.
Right. And what he said about the Columbia River Gorge in that video, the same thing applies to Lake Champlain.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right. If you look over on the other side of the lake, just along through Westport and along a lot of the shoreline, as I'm like boating along or canoeing over there. The railroad is literally the shoreline. It's the bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a derailment. How many when trains are going through Plattsburgh? What are we talking about for like numbers of cars on a train? Do you know?
100. Will counted 127 one time.
Yeah.
So over 100 cars.
Yeah.
And there's 30,000 gallons of oil in each one of those cars. So, what's 30,000 gallons of oil, just one car rupturing into the lake.
The damage it would do and cause to so much
Would be a catastrophe. Yeah. And realistically, a few of them could easily rupture in a bad derailment over there, and there's nowhere to go with a cliff on one side and the lake on the other. Yeah, obviously physics is going to put that stuff in the water.
It's affecting a lot of people, both sides.
Right. And, knock on wood, that stuff is not happening daily, but I don't even know if that, the spin machine will cover more accidents too before they do anything.
In Plattsburgh, say where it goes.
Also, so it goes straight through town. It goes right through the downtown pretty much. It's I know going to work, sometimes I get held up and it's about 5 minutes of a train, and right there you see it go by and heads I mean, you don't realize it because you think that you're going through about your daily life, and that's
right.
There, but then when you start to look at it and kind of realize how much of gallons of explosive explosive material is going through.
If it was obvious weapons, like military weapons stacked up on pallets of, high explosive munitions, people would give a shit about that. But it's just going by in this innocuous black car. It looks like a soda can, on wheels, kind of.
I have no idea.
It goes straight by my apartment, actually, and I can feel the difference in when it's a train, when it's a bomb train or a train carrying heavy crude oil,
right? And
not because it shakes, much more violently when you're sitting there, because my apartment literally does shake when
that's a heavy train with all the, I mean, literally compared to say, a boxcar carrying cornflakes with 30,000 gallons of liquid in there at whatever it is, 10 pounds a gallon. Those are heavy cars. And the railroad beds, I know, the rails and beds and tie systems are not in the best of shape. I mean, you ride Amtrak through there, they have to slow down to 30 miles an hour very often, and it's because of the condition of the railroad. So it's the pressure of the commerce. Like he said, I don't remember his name, but that former head of the National Transportation Safety Board clearly said it's the economics and it's the industry that's pushing this stuff out there. It also is illustrative of how much control they have, that they can do that with impunity and just get away with it, and nobody has any power to sort of rein it in or stop it.
But with this much weight on the tracks, it's going to affect the tracks a lot faster. They need to be.
People do have power when we work together and achieve, dare I say it, critical mass.
Critical mass, yeah, which will happen and eventually, because there's a lot of industrial sort of habits, I'm using that term loosely, that we have now, from industrial agriculture to the industrial scale war that I was talking about before, to just a lot of the activities that we sort of associate with the modern civilization. A lot of opinions amongst scientists now that we can't be doing a lot of these things in 50 years if we want to stop climate change, soil degradation, poisoning the air and water. I mean, a lot of things have to stop or change. Oh my gosh. That we have to modify some of this.
A lot sooner than 50 years.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's just just threw a number out there. But we can't be doing a lot of this stuff. We shouldn't be doing it now, Mary Alice.
Yes,
a lot,
exactly.
Especially poisoning the air and water, and
for
a bunch of people's short-term gain. For another dozen Lamborghinis to shove in the garage. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
A couple more zeros in the bank account.
Right, that you're never going to be able to spend it your whole lifetime anyways.
But are they not thinking about what they want to leave down the road for their children and grandchildren? For future generations,
legacy.
What is going to be left for them?
I think some of the people gaining from this really think that their money can insulate them from suffering any of the effects.
Yeah.
We can buy this, we can buy that, we can,
But they're going to find out they can't eat money.
And it's kind of true too as well for like, if you look at for the U.S. and then you look at the rest of the world, those that are poorest are the ones that are affected right now, and they are suffering a lot more. But we have this bubble that we end up having, that we are, especially through the bubble of materialism and consumerism, seeing that we have that little shield that we kind of see as not being affected, and so it really does affect once you look at it.
So far, a lot of the people, like you would say, like the primary people that benefit from the burning and producing of fossil fuels, they are insulated from the effects right now, still to a great degree. But just like in the Philippines today, where another very, very large typhoon hit, and of course you can't attribute every typhoon strictly to global warming. They've been happening in hurricanes for a long time, but the size and scale and frequency is definitely changing with ocean temperatures rising. And the Philippines is very low lying. Most people live just within 20 feet above sea level. And, so that's like the frontline community that you're talking about.
Right.
That was affected this weekend by a typhoon that's followed almost the same path as the one last year that, that was very lethal and killed quite a few people.
Yes.
It really was.
So, and you can just imagine all the island communities and all the coastal communities around the world, very much in the front lines of the climate change. Which is, all these issues are interrelated into the consumption and, ridiculous. It's sort of like binging on fossil fuels is what we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
It's an addiction, really.
It's an addiction. It's like a crack party.
Yeah.
But when and even the executives and whatnot are very, very hooked to the stuff and the power and the wealth that it generates. It is very much like that addiction analogy is really appropriate.
It is, yeah.
So, and getting back to the enabling language that I used earlier, consumers have to realize they have a lot of power too, and demanding through the pocketbook and whatnot changes. Because I guess, moving in renewable directions, the use of renewable energies it has to be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a key word is consciousness of a conscious effort, conscious realizing what, especially with the daily lives and routines that we do. We tend to have to try and meander through, but it's once you get into that routine, then sometimes you don't realize what really is affecting. And so having consciousness of what where this might go, it can be paralyzing, but
it can.
Yeah. But that's the point where you realize that you see the system that isn't in place, and then you realize, oh well, this is actually what's going on, and then you can actively and consciously go towards changing that system.
Yeah.
Especially if you bond together.
Yeah.
Lifestyle changes, though, that we make individually are only
Small.
a drop in the bucket, really.
Yeah.
And it's when we're like the climate march, when we do things together, really come together, even though we might be working on different things. Somebody's working on pipelines, somebody's working on trains, somebody's working on
Food access.
Social justice.
Organic, social justice, organic food, and so on and so forth. But to realize how all of these things are connected, and that we need to support one another in those struggles,
Work together.
so that we can get to, I'll say the word again, critical mass.
Critical mass.
It's like
Work
the
together, we
movement
gotta-
of movements. So we have all these kind of disparate justice movements, which is, I broadly categorize a lot of this stuff as reactions to injustice, which is what we are in the social justice, economic justice movements. But when we can achieve critical mass between movements, then you actually have some real political power, which is what another daunting thing, as well as lifestyle changes, is how do you begin to confront state and corporate power that are that desperately want this to happen? Like I said in my introduction, this is part of the system. It's not an anomaly. It's not something randomly happening. These from police brutality to recklessly burning all these fossil fuels. This is part of capitalism. This is the way it works. So somehow, some point, we have to get it together so we can actually confront some of those realities and then come out of it in a way that's sustainable, and that where we can, design a world that can support us.
Yeah.
And so much of it is supported or enabled by things in our laws and our tax codes. Do you know that corporations actually get money from our government, our tax money that we work for, for moving their operations off
Overseas or offshore.
The way our tax code is set up, they can claim it as an expense of doing business, and it needs to be recognized that is not a legitimate expense of doing business.
Right. And that's part of their relative power. the government as it exists today is really an extension of those giant businesses. It's not really like a separate entity. It's more of an extension of what they want.
Right. And it will continue to be an extension
Right.
of what they want as long as we sit back and do nothing or just whine, what can I do?
Right.
Which is the wrong question altogether.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what can we do?
Exactly. Let's talk just for a minute. We have the banner behind us here. Who wants to just tell me what this banner means here and where it was used or what it was made for?
Well, you guys.
Go, Adrian.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
So we've used this. Oh, did you?
No, go ahead. Just use talking to the mic there a little bit.
So we've used this a couple of rallies and community forums around Plattsburgh. We first used it in June for the anniversary.
July
like 6th, I want to say.
Yeah.
For the anniversary of Lac Megantic, as we like previously mentioned, was this huge catastrophe.
That was the 1-year anniversary of the disaster.
The 1-year anniversary.
So that was this past July, and we've used it at a couple more community forums, and
it's surprising how many people came out for that rally, too.
yeah,
Oh,
for Plattsburgh.
Dan, what happened to you that day?
I was arrested, but
Yeah.
Good for you,
For?
Dan.
Not for.
for crossing the tracks, but I was actually just trying to get, and their railroad police and local police were there, and so just cross the tracks and just trying to get to the rally, and so they
Wow.
Yeah.
And there
For
were
walking.
helicopters
Oh, yeah.
overhead. The sky was
Security
full of
helicopters,
helicopters.
Yeah.
For a small protest in
So
Plattsburgh,
somebody was
New York.
really nervous about
Yeah.
about your activity near the railroad tracks, and
Yeah, we were flattered, honly.
Yeah, he was just walking across them
Yeah,
to get
it's
to
very
us. He was just
flattering.
crossing
Yeah.
them like a street to get to us.
so Dan was just crossing, and what they charge you with trespassing on railroad
Yeah,
property
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what they got.
Canadian Pacific did it.
Yeah,
didn't
and it just goes on as trespassing for.
Darn extremists. You can haul that crude oil around, and
Oh, yeah.
run it through people's towns, past their elementary schools, and not even tell them.
Yeah.
That's not extreme
Yeah.
behavior. But boy, Dan, don't walk down the tracks,
Yeah.
man.
That's the real threat. Dan walking on the tracks.
I know, arrest of all. That's that funny kind of like
Yeah, really.
bizarre divergence. And then, so there was circling helicopters and all kinds of
Oh,
law
yes.
enforcement presence.
Yep.
Huh, well, good for
And
you
we
guys.
had told the police we had
It's mild, yeah.
with the mayor's office
Mm-hmm.
and with the police that we were not planning to do any civil disobedience or any blocking the tracks or anything like that.
And they didn't believe you.
And I guess
Apparently not.
Yeah, well, of course, giving them the benefit of the doubt, there has been some blockades occurring throughout, North America, even involving in Maine and in Canada and several other places that I have read about, where people have blockaded trains. And boo-hoo, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
That's not any kind of act. That's just purely civil disobedience from people that aren't politically represented. Because guess what? When you don't have any representation and the government has been taken over by giant private profit, what are you left with?
Yeah,
You're left with civil disobedience.
that's your voice.
That is
Yeah.
your voice, and it's a legitimate voice.
Yeah.
And some would say even minor or whatever level of property damage can also be, also in that same spectrum of a legitimate voice if you're
Yeah.
given nothing else.
I agree.
There's I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but it talks about basically how those in power would try to keep power and first in making sanctions upon in whatever way to make you not want to. So first you can say financial sanctions. So getting a ticket, that's the way to try and keep you in line of what
Right.
they want.
Yeah.
And then if eventually they'll resort to violence or things like that, physical sanctions, so that you can either be pushed out of not resisting, and so that's
Right.
And it's when you look at it from an entire society, it is kind of you can see that if as soon as you look at that and say that it's we're imposing these sanctions on you. So it may not be right, it may not be just, but this is what our current power says for you. And so the important part about that is that with that power, it's only manufactured by the consent of everyone else. And so if you take away that consent, that those in power cannot actually be impose the rule, because it's been taken away from them just by taking that little bit of power away from them.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And so, I mean, that's definitely something that, you know, there are a lot of injustices that have been going on and going on right now in the past, and it's one of those things that, especially when you realize that you have more power than you think, then you can really, really make a difference in what happens.
Just people in the sheer numbers of working people around the world far outnumber the owners and the exploiters and the people that are abusing the system and the world's people, not to mention the natural systems that we all live in. So we're disproportionately being affected by their behavior. It also gives a very clear view as to why the American political system has been so corrupted by corporate money, because there's so much return on that investment. I think it was a range from 2007 to 2012. The 200 largest U.S. corporations spent about $4 billion on lobbying and campaign contributions. So 200 companies spent $4 billion, but they got back in the trillions of dollars in contracts and whatnot, and subsidies on those investments. You know, so they got back. I think it was like it might have been the same ratio. It's like $4 to $6 trillion back. Those same 200 companies. So there's huge motivation and incentive for them to run the system.
And that's an interest rate of not like 1%, like we can get. That's an interest rate of 1,000%.
Right.
You know?
And they actually take that for granted. That people, they feel, talk about entitlements and people feeling entitled. They feel like they're entitled to that 1,000% return on that investment.
Yes.
By corrupting the political system. So, Jim, if you could show the second video that we've lined up. This is really interesting. It's called 300 Years of Fossil Fuels in 300 Seconds. I do believe it's something like that, but it's a very excellent by the Post-Carbon Institute.
I do want to mention Hands Across the Lake.
It all started with a big bang. Wait, we don't have to go back that far. The Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. No, it's still too far. Try this. It's the Middle Ages. People in Britain run out of firewood, start burning coal. But they use up the coal on the ground. Miners dig deep. Coal mines fill with water. Samuel Newcomen invents a coal-burning steam engine to pump out water so miners can keep digging. James Watt makes it practical for other uses. Now we have ingredients for the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels, and a way to put them to work. All hell breaks loose. Coal miners bog down lugging coal. Rails make it easier. Rails and steam engine combined make a railroad. Michael Faraday makes the first electric motor. Nikola Tesla invents alternating current. Soon utility companies start burning coal to generate electricity. Meanwhile, Edwin Drake drills the first rock oil well in Pennsylvania, and Carl Daimler builds an automobile running on petroleum. Coal tar and oil are turned into industrial chemicals and pharmaceuticals that prolong life, more population growth. The Wright brothers start oil-fueled aviation. Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch make fertilizer from fossil fuels. Fertilizer and oil-powered tractors expand food production, feeding more people. World War I is the first fossil-fueled conflict. Then comes World War II, giving us guided missiles and atom bombs. In between is a Great Depression, partly caused by overproduction. Powered assembly lines make products faster than people need them. Advertising executives invent consumerism to soak up overproduction. It's the 1950s. Advertisers use television to hook new generations of consumers. In the 70s, there was an oil shock. Everyone's shocked to realize how dependent they are on oil. With the energy crisis, the environmental movement is born. But oil prices fall and everyone forgets energy shortages. There's a showdown between market and planned economies. Market wins. Goodbye, evil Soviet empire. Politicians decide the market will solve everything. Personal computers arrive. Globalization takes over when the market notices labor is cheaper in China. Suddenly everyone has a cell phone, but world oil production stalls out. China is now burning half the world's coal to make export products. But where will China get more coal and oil to fuel more growth? Environmental problems everywhere. Rising CO2 levels lead to record heat waves, floods, droughts. Oceans acidify. Topsoil erodes by 25 billion tons a year from industrial agriculture. Ancient forests disappear. Species go extinct at 1,000 times normal rates. Fresh water is scarce or polluted. Oil companies drill in miles of seawater because the easy oil is gone. But a deep water oil platform explodes and fouls the Gulf of Mexico. Manufacturing moves to polluting countries where labor is cheap, while the U.S. becomes a casino. The financial sector is 40% of the economy. But Wall Street is over-leveraged. Banks fail. Unemployment soars. Credit evaporates. The economy is on the verge of collapse. Okay, present time. It's amazing how far we've come in 200 years, just 3 human lifetimes, from the beginning of industrialism till now. But where are we headed? We can't keep doubling human population. We can't keep dumping carbon in the atmosphere. We can't keep ruining topsoil. We can't keep growing population and consumption or basing our economy on depleting fossil fuels. We can't just print more money to solve the debt crisis. It's been an exhilarating ride, but there are limits. Now, it's not the end of the world, but we have to do 4 things fast. Learn to live without fossil fuels, adapt to the end of economic growth as we've known it, support 7 billion humans and stabilize population at a sustainable level, and deal with our legacy of environmental destruction. In short, we have to live within nature's budget of renewable resources at rates of natural replenishment. Can we do it? We have no choice. Alternative energy sources are important, but none can fully replace fossil fuels in the time we have. Also, we've designed and built our infrastructure for transport, electricity, and farming to suit oil, coal, and gas. Changing to different energy sources will require us to redesign cities, manufacturing processes, healthcare, and more. We'll also have to rethink some of our cultural values. None of our global problems can be tackled in isolation, and many cannot be fully solved. We have to prepare for business as unusual. Our best goal is resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and keep going. If we do nothing, we still get to a post-carbon future, but it will be bleak. However, if we plan the transition, we can have a world that supports robust communities of healthy, creative people and ecosystems with millions of other species. One way or the other, we're in for the ride of a lifetime. Understand the issues and pitch in. It's all hands on deck.
So Richard, you saw in the very end there, the narrator, Richard, has a lot of good videos out there and some TED Talks and stuff, and he's really a pretty amazing researcher, and he does a great job of compacting all that information in just a couple of minutes, way better than I could do.
Yeah, he did.
And that we could ever express. So I've used that video a couple times, but it does really do a lot of summing up about, the urgency and some things that we need to change in the short term, which is important for some of these younger people that are on the panel tonight. I mean, not that we're saying that it's completely up to them. It's all of us working together. Yes. But the coming generations, really are going to be affected more and more by some of these, trends and realities.
We have a responsibility for people in my age.
60.
Close. For what we pass on. I mean, what are these people, when they're grown up, these are my grandchildren, What are they going to be saying to us if we just keep on doing what we've been doing?
Right.
And don't make changes. I mean, I think this generation is going to be the most vilified generation in all of human history if we don't really get on the ball.
Yes.
We can be the heroes too, though.
Or we could be the heroes, that's right.
To start to make the change. Actually,
Yes.
it is very ironic that the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw coined that phrase years ago about the people that participated in World War II and fighting mid-20th century fascism, the greatest generation has indirectly, with the consumerism after the war, has really, exponentially grown a lot of these, trends and catastrophes that are now affecting the world and the climate and the environment, not intentionally. It's the systemic problems that led us in those directions. In 1955, when the Eisenhower Interstate Act was passed, and we started to, in a socialist, very public, common good way, we started to build all the interstate highways across the United States and link all the cities together, which is really car-driven, car-centric. Yeah. But why the heck in all those corridors wasn't light rail and railways integrally built alongside? That would have made so much common sense. Yeah. But of course, that was commercial pressure. They hated the tire and auto industries and hated the railroads. Basically competitors and different dynamics going on there. But that was just something that occurred to me. Wouldn't that have been a great idea? We could have all of these towns linked by light rail now, and cars could be an option instead of a dependency. But what can you tell me too? You have your Undercurrents newspaper here, and I know I've seen several of your names in here as writers and publishers. Can you talk to a little bit about what Undercurrents is?
Well, there have been 4 editions so far, and the 5th is ready to roll off the presses. And we've had sort of some different focuses, but it was begun on the premise that people are not getting all the news we need to know. There are things that the mainstream press just leaves out.
Sure.
Or covers in a distorted way. For an example, in Ferguson, it was never mentioned that the police shot Michael Brown from 148 feet away, not 30 feet. Okay,
right.
That's half a football field. It makes a big difference.
And 5 times.
So getting those left out details sometimes makes all the difference in the story. And then something that has come out of that since then was we worked to send some Plattsburghers to the climate march.
The People's Climate March
People's
in New
Climate
York.
March in New York. And then out of that came an invitation to speak. There was a climate summit in Vermont, in Montpelier, on November 1st. And people in Vermont had been working a lot on pipeline, but hadn't heard much about the rails. And so there was a presentation, and then there was some very dynamic conversation among the group of people that were involved, and out of that came the understanding that Lake Champlain is one lake.
Yeah.
It is one watershed. And whatever happens to the lake, whether it's because of a train, because of a pipeline, or what, affects all of us.
Exactly
So it
right.
really behooves the people on the 2 sides of the lake to support one another, to work together and support one another in these different struggles that we're going through. And so the working title for that emerged, Hands Across the Lake.
Yeah.
And that's what we're working now on, building up, Hands Across the Lake. And maybe since your viewers know how to get in touch with you, maybe they could communicate to you if they're interested in, on either side of the lake, in participating in something like that. Because there's lots of little tasks. You know, it's not like anybody has to take on a big, huge burden.
We could join hands all the way across the
There you
frozen
go.
lake.
There you go. Join hands.
Yeah, that would be
Yes.
amazing. As a show with, you know, with banners and signage and, you know,
There you go.
explaining the reasons why we're doing that. I love that
Yes.
idea.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Because it does, all of these solutions involve all of us. I mean,
Yes.
if
Exactly.
everybody's not participating, it's
Exactly.
not going to work.
Right.
That's right.
One of the things that, so before the march happened, really quickly there was a video that was called Disruption, and so one of the things that they noted in a human psychology and things like that is that the important thing is seeing, no matter how many people or who, that getting out there and doing something and having other people see you doing it makes it more likely that, you know, other people will want to join in, because they feel that you know, if you don't get out there and you aren't right in the crowd and things like that, and you're not joining on, then you end up thinking, oh, nobody cares about this, nobody really.
Right.
And then time goes on and nothing happens at all, and it stays in that systemic way of the old system, or the system.
Yeah.
System.
Right. It doesn't. It's again, you know, there's that dynamic of people climbing aboard, to use the train metaphor.
Yeah.
But as you know, as the movement or whatever picks up steam, you pick up more and more and more people. It builds a common courage,
Success.
a collective courage.
Success
And
breeds success.
Success breeds success.
You gotta
And I
keep
feel that
getting the
energy.
word out.
Right. You can feel that energy kind of if you're tuned in to activist communities, but also even just the media. I mean, you can see, that some of that energy is already beginning to move. People are starting to pay a lot more attention.
You can see that. Yes, you can.
You know, that's the critical mass reference that I use in the name of the TV show is, of course, not the nuclear or atomic weapon definition of critical mass, but it's the fewest number of people required to sustain meaningful change in the world is my working definition for social critical mass. So
I'm just looking up and this is December 7th.
it is December 7th.
73 years ago today,
Yes.
Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Yes.
Okay, with all of the greenhouse gases that are being thrown in the air and the open pit mining and fracking and dumping and stuff, it's as if the whole earth is being bombed.
Right.
And a harbor could be rebuilt. It's going to be awful hard to rebuild the whole planet.
Yeah, and that was, remember, we were talking earlier about that is a great metaphor, and that it really had to do a lot more with domination and control than
Yes.
it did some other country. I mean, these are all about resource wars and who gets to dominate the world's resources for their own narrow short-term gain. And the same thing as we're bombing ourselves that we were just talking about as a metaphor. It is appropriate that we're talking about this on Pearl Harbor Day because it's still about domination and control. And people working together have all of the power if we learn to realize it, in so many ways. So we absolutely can build that world that we're headed for. We can. And, that's the power of naivete, too, because we really have no idea who we're going up against. I mean, I feel very naive in that area, but I feel very empowered that way, too, because I am naive. I'm not afraid of them.
Right.
I mean, we have got to change this. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in. Have a great night.